We're back together again with psychological depth. Today's episode will dive into the topic, what your physique secretly tells women about you. She glanced at you for less than a second. The assessment was complete before conscious thought engaged. The evaluation that will shape how she treats you, whether she finds you interesting, whether she considers you viable. This evaluation happened faster than you could blink. No conversation was required, no demonstration of value. Just her eyes processing your shape, your posture, the way you occupied space, and reaching conclusions she'll rationalize later as gut feeling or chemistry, or something she can't quite explain. The assessment wasn't fair. It didn't consider your accomplishments, your intellect, your character. It didn't factor in who you are when nobody's watching, or what you've overcome to become who you've become. The assessment was primitive, ancient circuitry running evaluations that evolved before language existed, before culture developed, before any of the things we consider sophisticated about human experience had emerged. Your physique communicated to her in a language neither of you chose, but both of you understand. The communication happened whether you intended it or not. The message was received whether you crafted it deliberately or neglected it entirely. You're broadcasting constantly, and the signal you send shapes the responses you receive. Today, we're examining what your physique actually tells women about you. Not what you think it tells them, not what you wish it told them, but what their evolved evaluation systems are actually extracting from the information your body provides. The understanding matters because the communication happens regardless of your awareness. Understanding it means you can participate in the conversation rather than being subject to it without comprehension. The body is foundational to masculine presence in ways that contemporary culture often obscures. The messages suggesting that physique shouldn't matter, that character alone should suffice, that women who respond to physical presentation are somehow shallow. These messages describe a world that doesn't match how humans actually work. Attraction operates partly through conscious evaluation and substantially through mechanisms that bypass consciousness entirely. The conscious part can consider income, status, shared interests, conversation quality. The unconscious part responds to signals that indicate strength, health, genetic quality, and capacity to protect. Both operate simultaneously. Ignoring the unconscious part doesn't neutralize it. It just means you're not participating in a conversation that's happening anyway. Evolutionary psychology provides framework for understanding what's being evaluated and why. Women selecting mates in ancestral environments faced particular challenges. The partner who couldn't protect against predators or rivals was liability rather than asset. The partner whose physical conditions suggested disease or weakness carried risks that extended to offspring. The preferences that developed weren't random. They tracked indicators that predicted outcomes that mattered. Those preferences didn't update for modernity. The woman evaluating you in the coffee shop isn't consciously wondering whether you can defend against predators. Her conscious mind knows that predators aren't relevant concerns, but the circuitry running beneath consciousness doesn't know this. It's still evaluating the same indicators it's been evaluating for hundreds of thousands of years. What are those indicators? What is she actually seeing when she sees you? What information is being extracted from your physical presentation that shapes her response before she knows she's responding? The silhouette communicates first because it's visible from greatest distance. The shape you create in space, the outline that distinguishes you from background. This registers before details become visible. And the silhouette that registers as most masculine, most attractive, most indicative of the qualities her evaluation systems are seeking, follows specific geometry. Broad shoulders tapering to narrow waist creates the V shape that communicates particular information. The proportions suggest testosterone levels that shape development. They suggest strength that would be relevant in physical conflict. They suggest health that allowed proper development to occur. The shape doesn't require her to analyze these implications consciously. The shape itself produces the response. The ratio between shoulder width and waist circumference predicts attractiveness ratings with remarkable consistency across studies and across cultures. The preference isn't culturally constructed. It appears everywhere researchers have looked. The consistency suggests that cultural variation is overlay on top of something more fundamental, something installed rather than learned. Creating this ratio involves two vectors: expanding what should be broad and reducing what should be narrow. The shoulder development that creates width, the waist management that creates taper, both matter. The man with broad shoulders but significant waist has diminished ratio. The man with narrow waist but undeveloped shoulders has diminished ratio from different direction. The practical implication: shoulder development deserves prioritization. It often doesn't receive. The lateral deltoid expansion that creates width, the upper back development that creates thickness visible from the front, the trap development that creates the sloping line from neck to shoulder. These collectively create the visual impression of breadth that the ratio depends on. Simultaneously, waist management matters not just for health, for the visual ratio that triggers the response you want. The body fat that accumulates around the midsection compromises the taper that the ratio requires. Reducing it serves both health and the aesthetic evaluation that's operating constantly. The silhouette extends into how clothing functions. The V-taper makes clothes hang differently. The jacket that seems expensive on the man with proper proportions looks cheaper on the man without them. The shirt that seems tailored on one body appears ill-fitting on another. The physique beneath the clothing affects how the clothing performs. This is why certain men seem to make everything look good, while others can't seem to find clothes that work. The difference often isn't the clothes, it's the structure the clothes are draping. The investment in physique pays returns through wardrobe without requiring wardrobe upgrade. The existing clothes start working better because what they're covering has changed. Beyond the silhouette, individual features communicate specific information. The hands get evaluated more than most men realize. The evaluation happens partly consciously. Women notice hands, often ranking them highly among features they find attractive. But the evaluation happens partly unconsciously too, extracting information about the man's life and capabilities. The condition of the hands suggests what they've been doing. Rough hands with calluses communicate physical labor, practical capability, experience with the tangible world. Soft hands communicate a different life, perhaps intellectual work, perhaps leisure, perhaps absence of physical engagement. Neither is universally preferred. Different women respond differently, but all women are reading the information the hands provide. The hands with visible veins communicate cardiovascular health and low body fat. The vascularity that appears when body fat decreases makes hands appear more vital, more strong, more capable. The visual impact is subtle but real. The hand that looks vital versus the hand that looks soft produces different impressions of the person attached to it. Forearm development extends the hand's communication. The forearm with visible muscle definition, with striations under movement, with the appearance of functional strength, this reads as capability. The protection that our evolutionary systems are seeking includes the capacity for physical effectiveness. The forearm that looks strong suggests that capacity is present. The forearm is visible when sleeves are rolled, when short sleeves are worn, when casual dress exposes what formal dress conceals. The visibility makes the forearm disproportionately important for everyday evaluation. The bicep might be more impressive in total development, but it's often covered. The forearm is often available for assessment. The chest communicates sexual maturity and masculine development. The chest that developed fully suggests the testosterone levels that drive both development and the traits that testosterone correlates with. The underdeveloped chest suggests the opposite, something that didn't fully express, whether through genetics, nutrition, or training insufficiency. Upper chest development particularly affects appearance. The fullness in the clavicular region, the upper portion that creates the rounded appearance beneath the collarbone, this changes how the torso reads. The flat upper chest with development only in lower regions creates different impression than the full development across the entire pectoral complex. Beyond visual assessment, the chest affects physical interaction. The embrace that includes substantial chest creates different experience than the embrace of narrow torso. The sense of solidity, of mass, of something to rest against. This factors into how protective and secure the man feels to her. The feeling isn't purely psychological. It's partly the simple reality of what her body encounters when it encounters his. The arms communicate in ways that words about arms have made almost cliché. The rolled eyes that greet discussion of arm development shouldn't obscure that arm development actually matters. The bicep and tricep in proportion suggest strength that would be functional in the scenarios her evolutionary systems still worry about, even though those scenarios no longer commonly occur. The arms are visible frequently. Sleeves on most casual clothing don't reach the wrist. The short sleeve season exposes arms for months. The arms that fill sleeves differently than arms that don't create different impressions. The evaluation runs constantly because the visibility occurs constantly. Proportion matters in arm development. The bicep that's overdeveloped relative to tricep creates particular appearance. The arm that looks impressive from one angle but less impressive from others. The tricep that's overdeveloped relative to bicep creates different imbalance. The balance development that creates arm that looks complete from all angles requires attention to both. The lower body often receives less attention than it deserves from men focused on what they see in the mirror. The chest, arms, and shoulders get prioritized because they're visible to him when he evaluates himself. The legs exist below the frame. The glutes exist behind him. The developments in these regions don't provide the same visual feedback, but women see all of you, not just the front view you see in mirrors. The proportional assessment includes what happens below the waist. The man with substantial upper body and undeveloped legs creates particular impression. Something unfinished, something imbalanced, something that prioritized appearance over actual development. Leg development contributes to overall impression of power and capability. The thickness through thigh, the development in quadriceps and hamstrings, the calves that show below shorts. These collectives suggest the foundation that supports the rest. The foundation matters even when it's not consciously evaluated. The legs contribute to hormonal environment that affects everything else. Heavy lower body training, squats, deadlifts, leg press, drives hormonal responses that support muscle development elsewhere and affect everything from energy to confidence to recovery. The man who skips legs isn't just creating visual imbalance, he's compromising the physiological environment that supports overall development. The glutes factor into sexual assessment specifically. The rear view that women observe when you don't know you're being observed includes evaluation of glute development. The flat rear versus the developed rear creates different response. Not conscious usually, but present. The development that fills jeans properly versus the absence that doesn't affect how your shape reads from behind. Sexual performance itself connects to lower body development, the leg and hip strength that certain activities require, the endurance that comes from cardiovascular conditioning and muscular development. The physical capacity that her systems are evaluating doesn't remain theoretical. It becomes experiential if the relationship progresses. The body you've built affects the experiences you're capable of providing. Posture operates as modifier on everything else. The same development creates different impression depending on how it's carried. The man with substantial physique but collapsed posture reduces his own impact. The man with moderate physique but excellent posture maximizes what he has. The carrying often matters as much as what's being carried. Posture communicates confidence or absence of confidence before any other signal. The shoulders rolled forward versus drawn back, the spine compressed versus elongated, the head forward versus neutral over spine. Each of these indicates something about how the man relates to himself and to the space he occupies. The neurological research on posture and mood operates bidirectionally. The confident man adopts expansive posture, but the man who adopts expansive posture becomes more confident through the adoption. The body position affects the psychological state. The implication, posture isn't just expression of internal condition, it's intervention on internal condition. Carrying yourself as though you belong in space, as though your presence is legitimate, as though you expect to be taken seriously. This carrying produces the confidence it expresses. The woman observing reads the posture and responds to what it indicates, and what it indicates is partly being created by the posture itself. Body fat percentage affects how all development is perceived. The muscle that exists beneath body fat doesn't communicate. The development that's present but covered by adipose tissue doesn't register visually. The vascularity that suggests health and vitality only appears when body fat decreases below a threshold where veins become visible. The same amount of muscle at different body fat percentages creates entirely different impressions. The man at 18% body fat appears less developed than the man with identical muscle at 12%.
The leanness reveals what the body fat conceals. The revelation makes existing development visible that was present but hidden. The practical implication, development and leanness both matter, and they're somewhat substitutable. The man with moderate development and low body fat may appear more impressive than the man with substantial development and higher body fat. The visual impact comes from the visible development, not the development that exists beneath covering. Managing body fat involves nutritional discipline more than training volume.
The workout that builds muscle won't remove the fat that conceals the muscle. The nutrition that creates caloric deficit produces the fat loss that reveals the development. Both vectors matter, but the fat loss vector runs primarily through eating rather than exercise. The energy you carry, the vitality, the aliveness, the presence that extends beyond shape into something less tangible. This communicates through mechanisms that aren't fully understood but are definitely real. The man who feels vibrant reads differently than the man who feels depleted. The assessment occurs beneath conscious perception but affects conscious response. Physical development contributes to this energy. The man who's trained, who's conditioned, who's built something that functions well. This man tends to carry different energy than the man who's neglected physical capacity. The development affects confidence, affects hormones, affects sleep quality, affects everything that determines how vital you seem to yourself and to others. Beyond attraction, physique affects how you're treated in all contexts, the respect that attends physical presence, the authority that larger, more developed men seem to naturally command, the subtle adjustments others make in how they engage with you based on what your presence suggests about capability. The business implications aren't usually discussed openly but operate constantly. The taller, more imposing men earn more on average than shorter, less imposing men. The physical presence affects credibility, affects perceived leadership capacity, affects the unconscious evaluations that determine opportunity distribution. The gym isn't separate from career. They're connected through the perception that shapes both. The social dynamics that physique creates extend through every interaction. The friends who treat you slightly differently when you carry more presence. The strangers who extend slightly more courtesy. The baseline respect that seems to increase as physique develops. The changes are subtle but cumulative. The life you're living shifts incrementally as the body you're carrying shifts. Women's attention increases in ways that become obvious once development crosses certain thresholds. The glances that linger slightly longer. The interactions that extend slightly beyond necessary. The openness that appears in contexts where openness didn't appear before. The attention isn't requested, it appears as byproduct of what you've built. The attention shouldn't become the goal. The man building physique primarily to attract women often burns out because the relationship between effort and results is too indirect. The effort is daily, the results are long-term. The attention from women appears after extended lag. The man whose motivation is external often quits before the external reward arrives. The internal motivations sustain better. Building the body because you value what the building creates in you. The discipline that develops. The confidence that emerges from demonstrated capacity to change. The relationship to yourself that improves when you're keeping commitments to yourself. These internal rewards appear more consistently than external ones. The internal development also prevents the dependency that external motivation creates. The man who built himself for external approval remains dependent on that approval. The man who built himself for internal reasons has what he has regardless of external response. The security in the latter position exceeds the security in the former. Practical implementation involves prioritization of movements that create the visual and functional changes that matter most. The compound movements that build multiple muscle groups simultaneously. The pressing and rowing that develops the shoulder and back width that creates the taper. The squatting and hinging that builds the lower body foundation. Shoulder development benefits from lateral movement. Specifically, the lateral raise variations that isolate the medial deltoid, the muscle that creates the width visible from the front, the face pulls and rear delt work that creates the thickness visible from the side, the overhead pressing that builds overall mass in the shoulder complex. Chest development benefits from incline emphasis. The upper chest that's often underdeveloped relative to lower chest responds to incline movements, incline press, incline flies. The emphasis on upper chest addresses the common imbalance and creates the fullness that makes the chest appear more developed. Overall, arm development benefits from full range and both heads. The bicep long head and short head respond to different angles. The tricep lateral head, medial head, and long head respond to different movements. The complete arm development requires variety that hits all portions rather than repetition of limited movements. Back development creates the width that the V taper depends on, the pull-down and row variations that build lat width and thickness, the different grips and angles that target different portions of the complex musculature. The emphasis on width particularly serves the visual ratio that triggers attractive response. Lower body development requires the heavy movements that create hormonal response alongside muscular development. The squat variations that load the entire system, the deadlift variations that build posterior chain, the leg press and lunge variations that supplement the primary movements. Forearm development can occur through specific work or through grip emphasis during other movements. The fat grip training that makes standard bars more challenging, the direct forearm work, wrist curls, reverse curls, farmer carries, the grip training that creates functional strength alongside visual development. Body fat reduction requires caloric deficit maintained over time. The deficit can come from reduced intake, increased expenditure, or combination. The reduction that reveals development happens through consistency rather than dramatic intervention. The crash approaches often backfire through metabolic adaptation and rebound. Sleep affects everything in the system. The recovery that occurs during sleep enables the adaptation that training stimulates. The hormone production that peaks during sleep supports development and lean body composition. The 7 to 9 hours that most adults need shouldn't be negotiable. The training that isn't supported by recovery produces diminished returns. The journey from where you are to where you want to be involves time you can't accelerate beyond biological limits. The muscle builds at certain rates regardless of desire for faster results. The body fat decreases at sustainable rates that patients must accommodate. The transformation is real, but occurs over months and years rather than days and weeks. The man who begins understanding this commits differently than the man who expects quick results. The commitment involves accepting the timeline the process requires. The acceptance prevents the frustration and abandonment that impatience produces. The man who stays with it long enough gets results. The man who quits never sees. What you build communicates regardless of whether you intended communication. The physique you carry tells stories about your discipline, your priorities, your relationship to difficulty, your willingness to do what's hard because of what it produces. The stories are being read by everyone who sees you. The question is what stories you want to tell. The woman who glances at you for that fraction of a second is reading a story. The story might be about neglect and drift, or it might be about development and purpose. The story might suggest someone who couldn't sustain effort, or it might suggest someone who builds things that take years to build. The story you're telling affects what happens next in every context. The approach that occurs or doesn't, the respect that's extended or withheld, the opportunities that appear or remain invisible. The physique is medium through which these outcomes get shaped. The medium matters even when you'd prefer it didn't. Building the physique that communicates what you want to communicate is within your control. The gym is available. The movements are documented. The nutrition is understandable. The information exists. What doesn't automatically exist is the commitment to use the information consistently over the time the transformation requires. The commitment is the variable. The man who makes it and maintains it gets results. The man who makes it and abandons it doesn't. The man who never makes it has decided to accept whatever communication his current physique provides. The decision is his to make. The consequences follow regardless of whether he's thought them through. Your physique tells women things about you before you speak. The communication happens constantly in every context where you're visible. The evaluation that follows shapes her response in ways she usually can't articulate and often doesn't recognize. The system operates whether you understand it or not. Understanding it gives you opportunity to participate deliberately rather than being subject to evaluation passively. The man who understands what's being communicated can build what he wants to communicate. The building is work. The work produces results. The results change what's being read when she glances at you in that fraction of a second. The evaluation will always happen. The evaluation reads what's there. What's there is shaped by what you've built. What you've built reflects the choices you've made. The choices you make going forward determine what will be there to be read going forward. The opportunity exists. The implementation depends on you. For those who've experienced the shift, the change in how you're treated as physique developed, share what you noticed, what changed first, what surprised you. The observations help others understand what's actually possible when the work is done. Your physique is communicating. The question is whether you're choosing what it says. So, what are your thoughts on today's topic? Make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel, Psychological Depth, so you won't miss any of our upcoming posts. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.